but please welcome Carlos Juarez and his story, DNA, Deaths Needing Answers.
12 in progress. 1 out of 12 handle code 3.
Well, I'd like to thank Martin Milner and Kent McCord. I can see by your laugh that you recognize that they played Reed and Malloy on Adam 12, for those of you old enough to remember that show. Some of you may recognize me in this uniform. Some of you may recognize me from working bar next door a few minutes ago. But I did wear this uniform for 27 and a half years. I retired from the Santa Paula Police Department about 6 years ago, and this is the first time I've worn it in 6 years. Still fits. I learned a lot working as a police officer. I did a lot of talking to people and talking with people. And the difference, of course, is that when you talk with people, you're gathering information. When you're talking to people, you're pretty much telling them what to do. And that's what I did a lot of my career. For example, put your hands up. Keep your hands where I can see them. Oh, and by the way, put your hands behind your back. But I did spend a lot of time listening to people and learning things about them. And the reason for this was to get information. Information that was vital to a successful report, an accurate report. Something that would lead ultimately to a prosecution. And do people always tell the truth? Not really. That's why we go to school, to learn about detecting deception. And when you talk to people, a lot of times you can tell if they're telling you the truth. I think a lot of people have experienced that in your life. But when you talk to people in a very friendly atmosphere, you get more information. And sometimes you have to lie to get to the truth. That may sound odd, but yes, you have to lie to people to get to the truth, and we're allowed to do that. Or at least I was back then. But you got to be careful that when you lie to somebody, that you're lying about something that they know the truth, because what ends up happening is then you can't lie to them anymore because they know you're trying to BS them. Now, when you speak to people, you got to kind of adjust yourself for either an age bracket, young and old, experience level, or just how hardened they are. For example, when you talk to a child, you may want to get down to their level. Hi, my name is Officer Carlos. How are you?
Good.
Don't worry, you're going to be okay. Can you tell me what happened? You can't. But when you talk to people just that want to give you some information about what happened to them, it's just normal tone. Now, when you talk to people that are crooks, that's where it changes a little bit. That's where you got to use your police voice, and you really got to, turn from an interview to an interrogation. And sometimes it's not getting information from them, because if we've done our work, we know what happened. We know how they did the crime. I'll give you an example. I'll go up to somebody and I'll say, look, I want to hear your side of the story, but we know what happened, so you don't have to tell me what happened. I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell me. But if you start lying to me, I'm going to stop the interview right there. And I'm not going to give you an opportunity for you to tell me your side of the story. And that's worked several times, because when they've committed the crime, they want to tell you their story. Now, they want to mix it up a little bit to make, to lessen the impact. But they want to tell you the story. Now, a lot of things that happen in police work is that when you're getting information from people, you can't always rely on testimony and statements. You have to rely on physical evidence, corroborating evidence. And then something came along that's called DNA. And the scientific word is deoxyribonucleic acid. But I have my own definition of that, and that's deaths needing answers. Whenever somebody dies, we need to find out why they died. We need to find out who did it. And in genealogy work, we need to find out, again, why they died, see if there's something that generations down have to worry about. But also the stories that they take with them. You hope to capture those before they leave this earth. I became interested in genealogy about 37 years ago, and my interviews were very basic. In fact, my first notes were on anything I could find, yellow notepads, envelopes, and I still have them. And a lot of that information was gathered by word of mouth, because they didn't have all the websites that you go to now. In fact, my first interview occurred a few years before I became a police officer. It happened about 1982. my mom and dad called me, my mom and stepdad called me and said, hey, my great-grandmother had passed away. And she wanted to know if I wanted to go with them to Texas, to El Paso, and then cross the border into Mexico to the funeral. So we jumped in my car at 6 p.m. one night, and my mom, myself, and my stepdad drove for 17 and a half hours because the speed limit during the energy crunch was 55. So what do you do for 17 and a half hours? We talked a lot. We shared a lot of stories. And that's where I started thinking, it's probably time to start gathering this information. Now, once we arrived at El Paso, we crossed the border into Juarez. And yes, I've often wondered if any of my relatives, if that was ever named for one of my relatives or one of my ancestors. When we arrived at the funeral home, I remember looking down and seeing our great-grandmother, Francisca Robles. Where's Drea? Hey, we might be related. And she was in her casket, and I couldn't help but notice that, yeah, she looked Mexican, but I seemed to think maybe there was a little bit of Indian in her. I don't know. What do you think? Now, this made me realize we need to interview people and get their memories before they pass. On the same trip, I crossed over into El Paso, and I talked to not only my natural dad, but his mother, my grandmother, Dominga Juarez. And I started interviewing her and trying to figure out what happened, their side of the family. My mom was born in Mexico, and my dad was born in Mexico. So I've always considered myself to be first-generation American. My dad says that his mother was partying in Mexico and went into labor, and that's why he was born in Mexico. But when I talked to my mom, or his mom, she said, no, we lived in Mexico. So who do I believe? I think my dad used to tell a lot of stories, so I had to kind of filter through those. But what I did find out is that my grandmother, and on my dad's side, and my grandfather were both born in the United States. My grandmother in Colorado, and my grandfather in San Diego. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, am I first-generation American? Or am I third-generation American? Or am I first-generation once removed? And I guess I'll have to do some research to find out about that. But what I did find out on this trip was that our grandfather was very quiet, never really talked about what happened. But he and his brother Anastasio were orphaned at a very young age, at the age of 5. And when I asked my relatives, well, what happened? Well, I don't know. Why not? We never asked him. Why not? Well, he never liked to talk about it. Sounds a little mysterious, but I really wanted to find out what happened because, like I said, both he and his brother were orphaned at the age of 5. That would have been about 1925. And he died in 1969, and I remember him just being very quiet, drinking a lot, smoking, and always kind of sitting there in the dark. Heidi, my wife, a few years ago, started putting together some genealogy books. And she said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to make one for your sisters and your mom. So we gathered what information we had, and we started putting together a genealogy tree. And one Christmas, I presented them as presents. And I tell you, it was probably one of the best presents I could have ever done because it preserved our history. This is our tree. It's not really quite a big tree. It's more like a bush. So our son and daughter here, I'm right here. 5 generations up is Sylvester. He's up here. Beyond that, we really don't know because there really wasn't a whole lot of information that we got before that. But we do know that what happened was that he, meaning my grandfather Jose, was born to Silvestre Juarez and Lucia Bejar. And they both came from Juarez, Mexico. And so what happened was they traveled from Juarez, Mexico to San Diego in the early 1900s. And when you look at the old border crossings, we were able to find a border crossing of Silvestre as part of the crossings that they used to do. And some of the pictures from back then, there was a lot of programs where Mexican people could come over to shop, could come over to work, to come over and try to immigrate. And there were bridges, there weren't walls. And that's how they got across. And when they came across, they ended up relocating to Campo, California, which is about 90 miles east of San Diego. And they lived there for many years. He and his wife married, had 2 children, Anastasio and Jose. And they even, he worked for the Santa Fe Railroad Company. We have some ledgers through Ancestry where we're able to find where he signed off his timesheets. So there's a lot of interesting things you can find. One day, my wife and I were down in San Diego, and we had the address where they used to live in 1920 to 25. And of course, I Googled it, right? And so I looked, and we're standing outside the apartment or the hotel, and literally it told me that they used to live like half a block to the west of us where we're standing. Well, now they're building this big shopping mall. But that's where they used to live back in 20 and 25. And it was literally like 3 blocks from the railroad station. So we did learn during this search and ancestry search that they lived in San Diego, he worked for the railroad, and then in 1925 he died in Los Angeles at the Santa Fe Hospital. And the Santa Fe Hospital was a hospital that was funded by the Association of the Santa Fe Railroad Association. Now, a few months ago, I used to work for a funeral home. And I was certified in looking and inputting information into the death registry system. So I understood how important and how vital all that information is. There's so much information on a death certificate, but beyond that, at the funeral home and at the cemetery, they have a lot of information about family, education, grandparents, where they were born, all that stuff. So I ordered the death certificate from the Office of Vital Statistics and waited patiently for it to arrive. So about 3 weeks later, it arrives. I was so excited. I pick it up and I open it up. And so I start reading it from top to bottom. Sylvester Juarez, okay, I knew that. Date of birth, about 1898. Could you be a little more specific than that? No. Work of business, Santa Fe Railroad. Birthplace, Mexico. Well, that's a big country, man. Date of death, 1925. Okay, so the Santa Fe Hospital is where he died. And this is a picture of it way back in the day. I scanned down a little bit further. Mother, unknown. Father, unknown. This is kind of leading nowhere. Spouse, none. Wait a minute. He was married. What happened here? Cause of death, diabetes, mellitus. Well, that's kind of figures. We have a lot of diabetes in our family, so it obviously goes back 4 or 5 generations. So looking at the death certificate, there's a real important line, and that's final disposition, what they do with the body. And I was hoping it would say a funeral home, or I was hoping it'd say a cemetery, so it would give me one more place to go look. Final disposition, donated to the Los Angeles Chiropractic Hospital. What? Our grandfather was donated to science. You know, I couldn't understand why. Is it because he was sick and he didn't want to leave a burden of cost to his family? Did he abandon him? Did they leave him? I don't know. A lot of factors probably played in. I probably won't know unless I follow up at the hospital. So the Santa Fe Hospital was built by the Railroad Association in 1905, and it shut down in 1992. Now, it's rumored to be haunted and has been used many times for the backdrop of horror movies, such as Outbreak, Children of the Corn, End of Days, Day of the Dead, Dead Girl, Zombie Surfers. I got to get that movie. And Dexter. Dexter, of course, is a crime police analyst, blood splatter expert who freelances at night being a serial killer. So I hit a dead end, but I knew somewhere to go, and that's go contact the hospital. It still exists. So I called up and I spoke to one of the directors, Dr. Cabral, and using my police best lingo, I was, because I didn't want her to think I was just a genealogy searcher wanting to, take her time. But I said, hey, I'm an ex-cop and I'm trying to figure out where my grandfather is. I'm thinking he might be hanging around the hospital somewhere, So I asked her if she could maybe devote a little bit of time, and I'd even come down and help to see if we can't find out where Sylvester is, right? So she said, you know what, I'm going to help you. So about 3 weeks later, she called me back and said that she did as much as she could, but she just couldn't find out what happened to poor Sylvester. And I really wanted to, if I found him, I would have brought him home. I mean, literally, I would have brought him home. He probably never would have made it into the house, but he probably would have been hanging around my garage. Now, remember, I talked about DNA. Well, DNA is used in police work to clear suspects and convict suspects. But, what I did recently, just like that lady where she says I'm Hispanic and I tested my DNA and I'm 33% Native American. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a go too. So I tested my saliva, my mother's saliva, and my sister who's in the audience. We have different fathers, so we just wanted to see if there was something separate. And I'd be surprised when it came back, I was 51% Native American. And so, of course, my friends started asking me, when am I going to open the Juarez Casino, right? Well, it's not quite that easy because it really doesn't tell you what Native American you are. It just tells you you're part of North, Central, and South America. And it also tells you that this little red dot is primarily Hispanics in the Juarez area. So until they do more research and more analysis comes in, I'm just destined to say I'm a Mexican. I'm American of Mexican heritage with some, or actually 51% Native American in me. So my search for what happened to our grandfather is over, but my search for me and where my family came from is still waiting to be discovered. My DNA tells me that I have a history of being Native American. My family tree, as I said, is very short, still a shrub, but I've started something that I'm nowhere near being finished. Now, DNA has linked me to a lot of people. If you look, I mean, there's like, I don't know, 600 people that I'm linked to, but it's 5 generations back. Now, one thing that just came up, a little green leaf popped up the other day and told me that Silvestre's father is Cayetano. So again, and from there, it branches off into all these people. So I'm gonna have to do some research to find out where that's gonna lead me. So my years of research into my past and all the research and interviews I've conducted have led me to many dead ends. And at times, yeah, it feels like a big disappointment, but actually the investigative side of me knows that the answers are out there. I just have to keep looking, asking and searching for the answers. I personally believe that when one door closes, another one opens. Perhaps the answer to some of these questions lies behind one of those closed doors. In police work, we ran into many dead ends, but we kept looking and following other leads, and sometimes those leads led to other leads. I'll continue to look at those, look for more clues, and reach out, write, and record as much as I can about important information before we lose them. And I leave you this to ponder: DNA. It can answer a lot about you. It can link you to people you don't know. It can tell you hereditary things like illnesses you may not want to know. That's the scientific part. But as I said before, my own definition of DNA is death needing answers. In police work, we need to know the answers. The victims and families of crimes need to know those answers. But in my personal research, I found many answers of deaths in my family tree. But more importantly, I found and recorded important dates, names, stories from those I have had the opportunity to speak with. In the last few years, our family, like many in this room, have lost our grandparents, our fathers, our aunts, some cousins, and just recently our younger sister. I was fortunate enough to have recorded some of our family stories before they passed away. And I'll continue to try to document these stories for my relatives and friends before it's too late. And I strongly encourage each and every one of you to do the same, because once your relatives are gone, so are their stories.